Vilka har vi då här idag för vårt första seminarium? Jamie Butterworth, VD för Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Jamie, it's a great honor to have you here. Jamie has been active with the foundation since the very start. I believe it's up to 8 years now, putting everything in place and doing all the activities that Jamie will shortly tell us about just after my introduction. Jamie will shortly also be leaving this position and move on actually to do other things within the circular economy to make it happen more concretely, being part of certain companies and investments to make sure that this really happens in reality. So that's a great evolution as a next step. Martin Ådahl, chefekonom på Centerpartiet. Felix Ockborn, miljö- och hållbarhetskoordinator på H&M. Erik Lindroth, miljödirektör på Tetra Pak. Anders Wikman i de här sammanhangen, kanske bäst som återvinningsindustriernas ordförande och allmän opinionsbildare i resurs- och hållbarhetsfrågor. Sist men inte minst, min chef David Schelin, Ragn-Sells. Jag heter Johan Börje och är marknadschef på Ragn-Sells. Med de här orden skulle jag vilja be Jamie komma upp och introducera cirkulär ekonomi. Fantastiskt tillfälle att få en möjlighet att lyssna till Jamie som har varit med och skapat konceptet och också lära oss vad betyder egentligen cirkulär ekonomi. Jamie, welcome.
Okay, is that working now?
Yeah.
Let me try again. Good morning, everybody. That's better. It's working. Very good. So I wanted to, well, thank you first for inviting me in to talk to you guys. And what I thought would be interesting would be to talk about 3 different things. Firstly, the circular economy as a framework. Secondly, the economic opportunities posed by the circular economy. So what's the size of the prize, how that might work. And thirdly, to give some insight into some businesses who are starting to capture these opportunities and who are basically driving this to drive growth of their businesses. So what could we do to accelerate the transition towards the circular economy? And I often think that the easiest way probably to think about the circular economy is firstly think about the way that today's economy tends to work. So we tend to extract something from the ground, turn that into a material, turn that into a subcomponent, make that into a product, sell that into a market, and at the end of its life, dispose of it. And throughout that process, we use large quantities of cheap and available input commodities. So basically materials, be they oil-based or be they mined ore, and energy coming from fossil fuel sources on the main part, okay? So if we look at the kind of scale of this linearity, it is staggering. So if you just take one example and we take fast-moving consumer goods, we put $3.2 trillion US worth of commodity inputs into the fast-moving consumer goods economy each year. And we currently dispose of 2.7 trillion of that. We're unable to capture that value effectively once it's gone through the system. So we can see that the system that we're in today is predominantly linear. Now, if we look at what this means from an economic perspective, and we look at this graph here, which is pretty well distributed. You guys have probably seen this before, but this shows the averaged price of commodities entering the global economy from 1900 until today. It looks at 4 sub-classes. So it looks at metallic asset, non-metallic assets, agricultural and non-agricultural, including energy. And what we see here is basically a gradual decline in the price, albeit spiky, in the price of these commodities entering the economy as we get better at extracting and processing those commodities. So this is what's fueling economic growth effectively. And in about 2002, we don't definitely know what's happening, but many businesses and economists are now beginning to wonder what will happen in the future. Over the past 10 years, we've seen that century of price declines erased effectively. And there's a couple of interesting things about this. So one is that this is in the last 3 or 4 years when we've seen a bit of a global recession. This is one of the first times that we've also not seen a corresponding dip in commodity prices like we would have done in the past. But secondly, this is before we see an additional 3 billion middle-class consumers coming into the market between now and 2030. So the linear economy works incredibly well when input costs are easy to, basically cheap, and resources are readily available. But the economy is challenged more when this picture changes. So the circular economy is a generic term for an economy which is restorative by design. So it's absolutely not a new idea. That's one thing I wanted to say. And it draws from a number of disciplines or schools of thought. And I've put up here behind me some of the thought leaders who have really helped to define what the circular economy is. And I would say what sets these apart from some of the other schools of thought in terms of how you would deal with this challenge is that these guys are looking to create positive feedback loops effectively within the economy. So they're going beyond defining a system which is more efficient or one which does less harm into one which the more you do, the more positive that gets effectively. So how could you actually design the industrial economy such that it is restorative? So yeah, Michael Braungart and William Madonna from Cradle to Cradle from a design perspective, Janine Benyus with regards to biomimicry, Walter Stahl's work on the performance economy and functional service economy, Amory Lovins' work on energy, and Thomas Gradel on industrial ecology. There are many more, but these guys have really helped to define that idea. So what I wanted to do now, just briefly, was explore what the circular economy looks like. So if we go back to our linear economy, we've basically got mining into parts, into product manufacture. This is basically sold as either a product or a service to a consumer. And at the end of the life, we might extract some energy in terms of energy recovery, or we might simply go into landfill. Now, what characterizes the circular economy, as I say, are these feedback loops effectively. So very simply put, we would end up with two types of stuff within the economy. Technical nutrients, as Braungart would define them, which are kept at the highest possible quality and value, and biological materials or nutrients, which go back into regenerating food and farming systems. And simply keeping these separate increases the ability to valorize either of those two cycles. Now, if we go a bit further, we also can look at how we can drive productivity and value effectively through this model. So the very last thing that we may wish to do with something is to recycle it. In fact, if you look at recycling today and you think about plastics, the very best that we can do in plastics at the moment is in PET. So PET, like your Coke bottle globally, we're able to recycle 47% of that material globally. All the rest of it is currently incinerated or landfilled. If you look at polypropylene, which is a hugely common material in terms of packaging and automotive parts and things, it is a 97% linear industry. We're only able to cycle 2 or 3%. In Sweden, it's probably very good because you guys are generally very good at that kind of thing. But in the rest of the world, it is incredibly linear. There's very little is able to be reused. But what we really want to do is go above there. We want to look at refurbishment and remanufacturing, so how we can actually design products and components such that they can be rebuilt, upgraded. We go into reuse and redistribution, so how we could actually use these products again, and ultimately into full service provision. I want to give two very brief examples in these rings. The first one in terms of full service provision. So to describe this is basically moving beyond selling product to selling the performance of a product. So recently Philips have launched and are testing now in the Netherlands something called Pay by Lux lighting. And what they do is they sell the municipality light as opposed to lighting equipment effectively. And this has three benefits for them. First thing is it gives the customer exactly what they want, so they actually tailor their product offering to the customer to give them lighting recipes, in this instance to the roadway infrastructure, so they provide them the right light for rush hour time versus middle of the night. The second thing is that they actually take the margin when it comes to coming up with a more energy efficient lighting technology, so it's in their interest to upgrade and make that happen. And thirdly, they retain ownership of the valuable assets and components that lighting equipment is made from. A little bit further out, if we look at remanufacturing, and just to talk about the kind of shift that this has, take an example like automotive sector. So Renault, for example, can now take the drivetrain, the engine, or the gearbox of a car or a van. They can completely dismantle that. They can remanufacture it and send it out the door as a new product, in some instances upgraded. And in this process, they're using 80% less energy, than they would in a new product, and 70% of the embedded materials and labor. So it's actually changing the relationship between the way that the industrial economy is using materials and energy effectively. And the thing that really blew us away at the summit last year in London, which we held, was the chief operating officer of Renault saying that this plant that they have, their remanufacturing plant, out of every manufacturing plant they have globally, is the most profitable now because of the input cost changes. So very interesting to see that now some of these models are actually outperforming the linear models. And in the biological side, we see a huge opportunity for valorizing the feedstock effectively that exists in the biological side of the economy. I think we're going to hear a little bit about phosphorus. But in addition to phosphorus, we also have the ability for anaerobic digestion, for biogas and energy from that, and also into chemical feedstock extraction, which is very significant if we look at what we could do with, say, sewage sludge, sewage systems, and into things like food waste, and also the cascading of products through multiple cycles, like we may be seeing through companies like IKEA in terms of furniture into chipboard, into insulating products, and ultimately then being burnt for waste to energy. So again, this is basically providing a kind of framework for how we can drive value. Okay, so what's it worth then? That's a kind of interesting question. So in 2010, the organization that I work for, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, was really interested in all these topics, and we were reading many of the books from the people I showed before and visiting lots of companies. And the more we looked, the more examples we could find. But there was one piece of the puzzle that people would ask us that we just couldn't answer, which would be, what happens in the economics if you do this? So we started working with McKinsey, and we spent 6 months doing a report where we decided to take a section of the economy. So we took medium-lived complex goods in Europe, which is a really quite geeky name, but basically it means things like washing machines and mobile phones and TVs and computers and things that are mediumly complex but cycle quite quickly in the economy every kind of 3 years. And we took 5 of these different product types as signature products, and we worked with the manufacturers of those products, and we actually took them to a teardown facility in Munich and took them apart and discussed whether it would be possible to redesign both the product and the business model such that we were able to recover 20% of the materials or components in those products at the end of their life. And then what we did was did an analysis to say, what would this look like if you were to roll this model out towards 2020? And the findings were really quite interesting. So we believe that this would be worth up to $630 billion per annum towards 2020, which is equivalent to about 3 or 4% of European GDP. And this would fundamentally, even at only 20% of recovery, this would shift the run rate on resources coming into the European economy. So there's significant opportunity there to be gained. And this is not the biological side, so this is just one example. So I wanted to give 2 examples of how this framework of the circular economy helps you to redesign different things. The first one is really a mobile phone. I guess everybody in here has got some kind of mobile phone or smartphone, but I wanted to talk about design, business model, and recovery. And about a couple of years ago, my wife's mobile phone came up for a contract renewal, and she had an iPhone 4, and she was upgraded to an iPhone 5. And the guys who offered the service contract never asked for the iPhone 4 back. So a letter came through the post, and this small company said, we'll buy your iPhone 4 from you if you like. So I said, fine, send it in. And they sent me a check for £200. It's a lot of money, right? So I was like, what's happening here? Well, I wanted to find out. So we interviewed the company, and basically they were taking the phone. They were then selling that into a secondary market, into Eastern Europe. And if they couldn't sell it into Eastern Europe, they were then decomponentizing it, taking the battery, the camera out and stuff, and they're selling this on eBay as spare parts for other people. So I thought this is quite cool. But how come the service provider is losing £200 of their margin? This is crazy. And about the same time, we then began to see that some of the operators like O2 and Vodafone started to change the way they were selling the product. So that in the UK now, you have Vodafone Red Hot, where you don't own the phone, you have an 18-month technology refresh cycle. It's all in a small print. You don't rent it, because that's cool, we don't want to rent a phone, but you have this refresh cycle. So every 18 months, you bring back your hardware, they change the software over, you get the new variant of hardware, and they feed that back into the system. So this is the business model basically enabling the whole change of how that's operating. Now, what we find really fascinating about this, now we've actually had a student from TU Delft University working with Vodafone on this project, is what would happen if you were to design the product to fit that system. So that phone was still designed to be a linear phone, It was designed to go into a shop, to be sold, and to disappear. This is a project called Phone Blocks, which was originally a guy in Spain who started working with Motorola. Google actually now have a similar project called Project Aria, and it looks at how you could actually build a mobile phone which would be designed for upgrade and effectively modular from its very inception. So this would be based on the idea that you actually would start to build a phone that would fit within the model of a circular economy. And you can imagine that if you shifted both the business model and the design practice for how you did this, you could actually fundamentally change the way that products are used within the economy effectively. I also wanted to say that there are some companies who do this really well, and some companies who do this once and you don't really hear about it again. And what we see here is that in order to do this well, it spans every single department of a company. So it's very, very hard to change something in sales or procurement, but not in design or in the business model. And this is just one example of a company called Ricoh, based in Japan, which has been doing this very well since about 1994. And they have this Ricoh Comet sequence, which basically enables them to look at how they can drive value. So if you go to one of their remanufacturing plants and talk to the guy on the floor who's remanufacturing the components, they're incentivized basically to go from the outer loop, which is disposal and energy recovery, right into the inner loops of remanufacturing or into service provision. So I also wanted to very briefly describe what we do at the foundation, and I like to use the analogy of acupuncture. So we see basically today's economy is really very linear. And where we want to get to is an economy that we know what it looks like. So we have two types of stuff, biological and technical. We move from the outer loops of recycling into the inner loops of service provision, or in the biological side, feedstock extraction. And we power the system using renewable energy. So we know the picture where we want to get to, which is really important. But there's this massive transition period in the middle. So what we look for are these points of acupuncture where we can have a disproportionately large impact in trying to make this accelerate effectively. And this leads us to working in three areas: in business innovation, in education, and in providing new insight around the economic and employment opportunities of the circular economy. And really, very simply put, this is based on the simple principle that if you are a company, or you are a university, or you are even a region who is trying to make this happen, it is much easier to do that if you are aligned and together with a group of companies and regions and universities who can ask the right questions, sometimes difficult questions, have access to the right research and the right education and the right other people within the supply chains that they would need to make this happen. And in fact, there are a couple of companies I know who are part of the program that we run, including Ragn-Sells and H&M, who are part of this big group of companies now who are coming together through something called the Circular Economy 100 to set up 10 different functional topics around the circular economy, looking at some key industry sectors to set up pilots and really drive this forward. And this will inform a huge amount of knowledge with regards to how you could scale this up at an economy level. So there are also some other technologies that are converging with this that are making this happen. And we've really learned within that group that we need to expand out into some other areas. So we can't just look at materials in the economy. There are other things happening that are bigger than this that are also helping to make this happen. And just three things here quickly. One is biomimicry. We really believe that this is one of the key disciplines that we would need to build a circular economy. So biomimicry is based on the idea that we effectively have access to 3.2 billion years worth of research and development in the living systems, and ultimately these guys are running a circular economy, right? So what we can see here is we get insights into how we could build things. And just one example, so the reason for the picture of this beetle, that beetle is made of one type of polymer effectively, or one type of protein. There are only effectively three used in every single living system, from a blade of grass to a giraffe, right? It's not about having many, many different materials and material complexity in living systems. It's about how you build structure. So it's about intelligence in structure and form. So that links into, for example, 3D printing. Once you can print things in a different way, in, for example, 3 or 4D, you can also start to build up color, structure, mechanical properties using 3D printing, effectively, or additive manufacturing. So this is merging together with that technology. So you can imagine you could end up with an optimized palette of materials within a more circular economy. And finally, whatever you want to call it, big data, Internet of Things, enabling technology, We believe this is huge. We're working on a small project at the moment about how you would intelligently track assets and components and materials in the economy. And obviously, if you are able to know what things are made out of and where they are and what status they're in, you can valorize those components to a very large extent. So finally, we believe there are 4 building blocks for the circular economy. And really, these are very important to happen in sequence. It's quite hard. We see quite a few examples of people doing one really well, but the companies that seem to do this for a long period of time and make money are doing all 4. The first one is the business model has to work. If it doesn't work, then ultimately there's no point in making this happen. And moving towards either performance-based business model, deposit schemes, whatever it is, that is a fundamental principle of how this will take shape. Second, actually designing the materials, the palette of materials, and the way that we make and design products in order ease of disassembly or modularity is key. Thirdly, the reverse cycle, how we actually get things back, how we collect, how we treat, and how we redeploy into the economy, the relogistics part. And I think this is why it's really exciting to be here with Ragn-Sells, because they're one company that's really pushing the thinking around how you can do this. Ultimately, this will be much more about partnerships of organizations working together. So it won't be about a waste company sitting outside. It will be about a resource management company sitting within the supply chain, probably of a number of other participants. And we're already beginning to see these type of partnerships emerge, for example, with Ragn-Sells and H&M and others. It's going to be much more collaborative economy. And fourthly, the enabling system conditions. So we can also do things, whether it's these emerging technologies or whether it's policy and legislation, that could actually push this harder and faster. We work a lot in education, and we were talking to a teacher who'd been working with a student, and the student was saying that when they did their exam when they were 15 or 16, they had this open design contest, and they could design anything they wanted. And they said they couldn't really think of anything to design. You know, it's all been done before, whether it's a car or a chair or whatever it is. It's all been done. And then they did a project on the circular economy, and they were learning about materials and design and these business models. And they went back to their teacher, and this is what he told us. And they said, now everything I see, I want to redesign. And for me, that's what the circular economy does. And I think whether it's the city of Stockholm or whether it's Sweden or whether it's one supply chain, this gives a lens of a different way of thinking about the world. So thank you.
Excellent, wonderful. I think I will invite Martin, because I know you are sitting on nails a little bit, having to actually attend another seminar, and then I will invite Anders after that. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Martin, and I'm the chief economist of the Swedish Centre Party, which is claiming to be a green and very environmentally concerned party, but also interested in how business models can be. I promise you that if I could choose to be after Anders Wijkman, I would, because that would make my job so... You can hear me, I hope. Yes. Otherwise, because he will probably give you wonderful insights, and it would have been fantastic to debate with him. But I will talk about this very same subject with the Archbishop. I promised to be there at 12 o'clock, so I have no choice, and that was the premise for this. We have now listened to one of those fantastic sort of non-profit consultancies that make, and I've also been, it's similar, I've been listening to Amory Lovin several times, and you get this feeling that it has fantastic possibilities for changing business without giving up their profit goals and motives, and at the same time gaining a lot of social cost. I have myself a different perspective, and that is, of course, the policy perspective, the perspective of laws, of regulations, of taxes. And Sweden, I'll just start from the policy perspective of Sweden. Sweden is a raw material producing economy. What was shown, the commodity boom we had in the world has earned Swedish business a lot of money, has been very, very profitable for many Swedish industries. But amazingly, at the same time as Ragn-Sells and others will probably put it much better than I will, Sweden is also very much a recycling country. We send to landfills about 3 kilos as compared to about 164 kilos in the rest of Europe. Now, a lot of that is incinerated, which I don't think is necessarily always bad, but still a lot is recycled, and a lot is also put back into the recycling, the circular economy. Now, this doesn't mean we are anywhere near where we should be in the terms of using materials and anything, but we have a paradox here. Sweden is good at raw materials, gaining a lot from selling it to the rest of the world, and still we want to be a recycling cyclical economy. It's been a very strong theme for my party for decades. Now, I think there's two different reasons, just to go directly into policy after that. The first one is obviously that there is an economic gain. So if our industries could be in the front line of this, like Ragn-Sells, like others, we have a gain for that, which is, of course, is important. Secondly, and there's big projects now been run by our environment minister called, as many of you in this room might know, called the New Climate Economy, trying to put forward in many different ways exactly what has been said from the foundation here, how actually those economies that can realize this potential will gain. Now, secondly, we have to lead by example. I mean, Sweden is such a small country, and many of the global commons, we have no influence, only through example. So we have to show a good example to the rest of the world, and of course, obviously, the climate issue is very important because this is an important component in all the different estimations of how we can reduce the climate impact. And there also, though there is a trade-off. Now, between using this as energy and using this in recycling, I'll come back to that. So finally, even in Sweden, we have resource issues. Phosphorus was mentioned. It goes for every country. Even a country that produces a lot of raw material can have serious resource issues in itself. And I think one which is becoming more and more evident is our paper and pulp industry, which is competing for the material for energy, as was mentioned, for biochemicals and for all different sources. Now with the reduction of newspaper reading, which in a sense is also a resource efficient way of consuming news and information, there is a small crisis. But in general, there's a heightening of the competition for recycling in the paper and pulp industry. And there we need to go into exactly what mentioned before, this cascading. It was another seminar, this cascading thinking that we haven't been used to in Sweden, because we haven't been delivering the different components in those industries. Or the phosphorus was mentioned, extremely important in the long term for the survival of agriculture, not only here but everywhere. And I think, so finally, what can we do? I would have loved to discuss this, and maybe Anders will be able to criticize this somehow and put in perspective. But still, we can do, first I think it's important that all the rules and regulations try to put forward this as much as possible. And there we have, during those years, tried to move it. It's not a coincidence that Anders has also been the investigator for how we make public procurements in Sweden, where we want to have much more this as a factor, recycling, how we decide how the rules are set. Much of this on the EU level, so it's not always easy, but still. Secondly, we need to have a green tax shift. This is extremely important, I think, for us, and that we put up the taxes on resources, and specifically on those who have an environmental impact. So both energy resources that have a climate impact, and also we're trying now to move into taxes on chemicals, so that they are also, we try to reduce the impact of that. And that will lead also to resource efficiency, and with that be able to lower taxes on labor, so that this labor-intensive industry will be helped and be able to create it. And finally, infrastructure. You mentioned biogas. We try to build up infrastructure, and today the government had proposed a very vast infrastructure proposal for the long term, but I think we also have to pinpoint the infrastructure for recycling and so on. But still, I also think that we should give some room for the market initiatives. There's a lot of criticism, and probably fairly so, about the recycling in Sweden, but still, the recycling industry in Sweden is obviously able to recycle a lot of the materials today and is on the way to do so more. And we should be a bit careful not to over-regulate the competition between different models and different examples so that the best can win. So in all those different sort of having good regulations, but in the terms of competition, keep the competition going, having a green tax shift and having an infrastructure. That is what we can do. You'll probably give me more, and I will promise to keep tab on that when after the seminar, after I had spoken to the Archbishop. But that is what we can put on the table. We're on the way. It's better than it used to be. It's still not good enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Tack. Hi. Higher forces are calling. While you are leaving, will there be a green tax shift if you and your partners will be in the new government?
Yes,
Anders.
we had a seminar just a few weeks ago where we had experts coming in, and we have actually quite important plans, and we have an investigation on taxes on chemicals to reduce the use of those. We also have ideas about how to change taxes on the energy side, both in Europe and at home. So we are actually, yes, there will be.
There will be. Wonderful. Thank you. Anders. Jag vill lämna så mycket som möjligt till debatten så vi kan försöka komma ner på 5.
Thank you very much. The difference between Martin and myself today is that he is invited to speak with the Archbishop. I'm not. But I think we can connect afterwards and compare notes. As Johan said in the beginning, this is interesting because last year I don't think there was one workshop or seminar on this particular topic. Yesterday I was participating in 3, so this is the 4th one. And I think that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has done a lot of good in forcing or making this topic very visible, not least in the context of Davos meetings in January each year. The focus, as we heard from Jamie, has very much been what companies at the micro level, if I may put it so, can gain from this in terms of controlling costs and in terms of security of supply. But I would submit that this resource efficient, moving in the resource efficiency direction gives us so many more benefits that we should recognize. Energy demand would go down. You look at any metal or mineral and you see if you reuse materials, you gain between 60 and 95% of the energy required. CO2 emissions will go down. We don't have much research into that. And one of the problems in climate mitigation strategies in most countries so far has been that the focus has been vertical. Each sector looking at how we can save energy, how we can do things in a better way. But this horizontal approach, where you look at the metabolism in society, has been totally lacking. And I'm sorry to say it has been totally lacking in this country as well. All kinds of pollution will also go down. We will have less impact on ecosystems indirectly because of less mining. And I would submit that we would also have gains in terms of employment. Because an economy where you will have more recycling, more reuse, more reconditioning, and by definition, more service provided, will require more jobs. So I think this is fascinating, and it's a technology shift, and it's being helped by another important technology shift that was already referred to, namely the digitization of the economy, the Internet of Things, because it will be much, much more easy in the future to know where materials are and where they have gone. Now, I'm not new to this topic. I've known Janine Benyus, Amory Lovin's, Walter Stahel for decades. And in my book with Johan Rockström a few years ago, Bankrupting Nature, we have in fact a chapter on the circular economy. So I'm very excited that the issue is now moved into the mainstream, because I think we can benefit so much from it. And eventually it's a question of decouple economic activity from an increased use of energy and materials. It was a topic in the Brundtland report in 1987. We have seen some decoupling, but mostly relative decoupling. It's been eaten up by growth of the economy and by so-called rebound effects. So what we are now after is absolute decoupling. We have to cut the link because we only have one planet. And with 9 to 10 billion people in a few decades' time and more purchasing power, the way we are organized today is not going to work. We would need many more planets to continue to run like we do. Now you may ask yourself, why hasn't this happened? Well, I think you showed your graph that real prices of most commodities were in fact falling during the 20th century. It's only very recently that we've seen this upward drift. So that's one reason. The other reason is, of course, that we never pay the full costs in the marketplace for the things that we buy, because many of the so-called external effects on the environment, on climate, even on people, are not really accounted for. So there is a huge rebate from nature. And if the market economy could internalize this by itself, this would be no problem, but it cannot. It's the work of the political system, and the political system has not delivered. So I think this is really a breaking point. And I'm very encouraged to see that you have already lined up 75 or 76 major companies to help you in this process and to learn from each other. So this will happen, but it's up to the political system to decide how fast it will happen. And there will, of course, be economic actors that don't really like this. Fossil fuel companies, they don't like this. Some of the major mining companies will not like it because the demand for what they are doing will decrease by definition. But for the rest of the society, this will be very, very positive. And basically what it's all about, it's to prolong lifetime of products. It's to recycle and reuse and recondition much more. And you gave the example of Renault. I think it's fascinating that their most productive and profitable company or part of the company is the one that reconditions old engines. Could you have thought about that only 5 years ago? So this just shows that there is an enormous potential. So let me just finish by saying that I do think we need some policy measures to make this happen much faster than elsewhere, than otherwise would be the case. Martin Ådahl indicated that a tax shift is one way of pushing this forward. Of course, I think we should scrap taxes on normal incomes and tax virgin material use instead. Secondly, I think there should be no VAT on recycled materials, because VAT by definition is to tax value creation. Recycling is not value creation, it's preserving what we already have and caring for it. Thirdly, I think we should have some kind of a tax on waste incineration. If we really want to recycle and reuse more materials, the waste incineration is really a threat, and it simply doesn't make sense. And finally, we should of course do more in terms of design. There are 2 academic institutions in this country who focus on sustainability design. And a few years ago there was none. So this just shows that there is very little knowledge about this. I believe most of the knowledge we have are in individual companies, by sitting in individuals. But I mean, collectively we know very little about this.
Anders, may I just stop you there?
Yeah.
I thought that was an excellent ending, and we'll get back.
I would like to say that we, the Återvinningsindustrierna, the Recycling Industry Association, together with the Club of Rome, together with the Stockholm Environment Institute, Global Utmaning, and a few other institutes, we have just launched a research project where we are going to simulate for the Swedish economy what would it mean to move the whole economy in this direction. in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions and job gains. And it's a fascinating project, and I hope we will have some preliminary results already in September or October. And that, ladies and gentlemen, could have an impact, a positive impact, on next year's deliberations in Paris for a climate agreement. Because if we can convincingly show that by being more resource efficient, we will also bring down greenhouse gases and provide more jobs. Win-win.
Thank you. Felix, please remain at the table. I hope to take us as soon as possible to a discussion and a debate.
Oh, I'll stand over here. So, coming from H&M, we are a global fashion company. Our business concept is, thank you, fashion and quality at the best price. That business concept has taken us to 54 markets globally. We also have a very global value chain. And let's see if I can get this one to shift. This is a representation of our value chain. We take a value chain approach to working with sustainability. And I'm going to give you a few concrete examples of what that means. Our value chain really starts in the design phase, where our designers, our in-house designers, are able to choose sustainable raw materials and design for long life or long-living products. By now, we have 15%, or a little more than 15% of all the materials that are used for our products coming from more sustainable sources, such as organic cotton, recycled materials, and what we call better cotton. Fabric production is another part where we're using a lot of resources. Up to 36% of the climate impact is coming in this stage of a product's life cycle. And we're working quite hard with our suppliers on improving efficiency, both in terms of climate or energy use as well as water. And from our customer point of view, this is also the part of our value chain where we have a large impact on climate and water. And we are working hard to inspire customers how they can use the products to make them live longer, to last longer, with a reduced impact on climate, such as reducing use of ironing, tumble dryers, things like this. But the real big impact that we can have is the last part, which is the recycling, where we need to work really hard on closing the loop on textiles. And so we're already started working on efficiency improvements, but when we get to this phase, this is where we can really see the huge improvements. And basically what we want to do is we want to let customers enjoy fashion, such as this beautiful dress made of recycled polyester, 100% made from PET bottles. Wear it, love it, care for it. When you don't want to use it anymore, let someone else wear it. And when the garment has sort of run its life cycle and it cannot be reworn anymore, make sure we can recycle it. Now, there are different ways you can do that, but we try to make this very simple for our customers. This is how we can really drive behavior change. And we've initiated the Garment Collecting Initiative, where in all our markets we have collection boxes in our shops where you can bring in any type of garment. It can be H&M garment, any other type of garment. It can be home textiles as well, any condition. And we are working with partners to make sure that those textiles are being recycled in the best way. Of course, if they can be reworn again, they should be through the second-hand market. If they can't, they should be reused or recycled. What we want to do is to improve or increase the amount of textile fibers that can actually be recycled and go into new garments. I'm showing a stack of jeans here because we actually launched the first collection where we have garments with so-called closed-loop materials, and luckily I'm actually wearing them. So these pants here, these jeans, are made from 20% closed-loop fibers, where we've actually collected the fibers in these boxes, worked with different partners to bring them into our supply chain. Now, today we can only put in 20% because otherwise the quality of that garment wouldn't be strong enough. So what we need to do is to work to increase both the volumes of textile fibers, but also how you can recycle it and make new products that that are consisting of more recycled materials and that can last longer. So if we're talking about, I shouldn't use this thing. I'll click here instead. Talking about challenges and opportunities. First, we have a picture of quite old technology here. What we need is to see new technology that can improve how we can recycle textile fibers. That is also a huge opportunity for new jobs and new services. Another picture here is showing certain barriers that we are seeing when we're working on this. There are trade barriers to working with wastes if you want to have a global economy. There are also attitude barriers to looking at waste as a resource, which it should be considered as. And last one, question of money. We heard that natural or virgin materials are priced way too low, whereas recycled fibers in the textile industry is sometimes more expensive. Of course, this is the current situation. What we need to do is increase the volume so that in the future we can see that recycled fibers are much more cost-effective than buying virgin raw materials. Thereby we can create collections that are based on a mixture of materials and hopefully in the future 100% possibly recycled materials. So what I just wanted to end off with, we've started working on a circular economy thinking, resource efficiency through our value chain. We've initiated this initiative to take further steps. We believe that our business concept of fashion and quality at the best price can deliver in that kind of economy. But we have a lot of things to do still to really work in a circular thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix.
Good morning, or hello, as we say in my home street in Lund, Sweden. This is where Tetra Pak was founded in 1952, based on the notion of our founder, Dr. Rudolf Rasing, of a package should save more than it costs. This was a passion to remove inefficiencies in the supply chain of food, specifically milk, but also a passion for reducing food waste. In the 1950s, we wasted as much as 30–40% of all the milk we put in the market. And this is now becoming a really relevant perspective also in 2014 and becoming increasingly important. Johan, you asked me to talk a little bit about how we've included environmental sustainability in the business model of Tetra Pak. And if we look at the way we have put a strategy for 2020, we have 4 challenges at the very top of the company. When we look at what are we there for, what are we going to deliver for 2020? We want to grow, we want to innovate, we want to work with environment at the very top level in the company, and we want to reduce operational cost throughout the whole system. So environment is one of 4 strategic pillars in the strategy to deliver the value that we want to do all the way up until 2020 for Tetra Pak. The environment challenge here is really about answering 3 questions. What raw materials are we using? What is the impact of those products during the life cycle? And what happens once the package has been used? What I want to say with this is not one of these questions only, it's the totality. It's to have a full transparency from start to finish, from raw material to use and reuse as part of making environment a key component in delivering a competitiveness for Tetra Pak today and even more so in the future. Briefly, what we talk about when we come to material use, we have 2 specific challenges we're working with right now, is to increase the share of responsibly sourced raw materials. In this case, we work with FSC certified materials, where we, last year, 2013 should be, 33 billion of our packages around the world were FSC certified. In Sweden, we passed 50% share of FSC labeled packages last year, and we have a 100% ambition within a couple of years. And also, what we've done is to start to work with renewable materials, bioplastics, as a source, or bioethanol as a source for raw materials for producing plastics. We use a liner of plastic, but we also use plastic for caps. So this year in Sweden, we've now started to launch bio-based caps together with customers. Oatly and Arla, our 2 customers in Sweden, have launched this year. So rather than using fossil raw material, we're using renewable raw materials as a basis for the plastic. Then the next step is also to take the full value chain approach, similar to what H&M were talking about, that we have a role to play in the value chain, but we put a climate target for 2020 where we go from Tetra Pak and the impact we have to the full value chain. So the climate target we put in place for 2020 takes the full value chain, really a scope 3 target from 2010 up to 2020, where we want to have full control of the impact we have throughout the value chain from a climate perspective. Finally, recycling, to make sure that we collect and recycle the raw materials and put them to good use for new products. And one of the key challenges we have here is to make people understand that the process of recycling our packages is actually very simple. Similar to this, it is using water and agitation to separate out the paper fibers and the plastic and the aluminum components. This goes into making new paper products. This goes into making pellets for new raw materials for new products. So extremely important to get people to understand that this is the way it works. And what we're now doing as well is making this a part of how we work together with customers and the full value chain. So for example, 2 examples from this year, we made a competition together with ICA, the biggest retailer in Sweden, to try to engage people more in returning more of the packages. And actually this week we're launching SM i kartongvikning, the Swedish carton folding championships, asking people to submit videos of how quickly and elegantly they can fold a carton package to make it ready for recycling. We ran it last year, we had more than 100 entries. We hope to have 200 this year. This we do together with Alla. So 2 concrete examples of how we're doing this, to put a bit of fun into this as well, because it is a very serious subject, but it's not so serious that you can't allow yourself as well to have a little bit of fun. This is a way to engage people to get them to change. In the end, what we want to do is to provide a good product based on solid raw materials with as low impact as possible, being recycled in the end, but all the while with the respect of protecting the food that our packages are there to do. Coming back to the challenge of the package should save more than it costs, also from an environmental perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I'll ask David and Jamie to come on stage.
Thank you.
David, so we heard a lot about the circular economy, and we heard Jamie saying that, you know, maybe the least value is in the recycling phase. How really come that we have decided to join Ellen MacArthur and to push this evolution?
Well, for us it's been quite natural. I mean, we're a 3rd-generation family-owned business that has been part of the eco-cycle since we started, basically. So the thinking that comes along here is very much in line with the kind of genome of the company to start with. But to give you a bit of concrete examples, I mean, we talked about, I mean, you guys also represent family-owned businesses one way or the other, and it's quite interesting how these businesses tend to be in the forefront when it comes to moving into new directions. But what I'd like to say is that we operate in basically all industries in Sweden, and what comes out from these industries by the end of life of products is, of course, waste. In this cycle here, the forward-directed cycle, to us comes around 5 million tons of waste every year. 5 million tons. Obviously, we are in a position to know quite a bit of what types of materials comes out of each and every industry. And obviously, we also work quite closely with these industries in order to improve the flows. And that's where it becomes a bit counterintuitive, because, I mean, our business is really to take care of waste. We charge our customers per ton, and then we tell the customer to give us less. How will that fly? And that's a challenge, and I'll explain a little bit if I have time on how that works. But we think ultimately that our challenge is to help these customers to be more resource efficient in the way that they don't waste as much resources in their process. We can help detoxing the flows that comes out of that. That means that we actually don't destroy our environment. That is the premise for our continued life on this planet. And we'd like to take out most of those materials that comes out from this flow and into recirculation. So our ambition is really to support the companies in being less wasteful and prolong the value creation chains for each and every material so it actually can constitute an alternative raw material for production of new goods. Now, that is a little bit of a challenge if you deal with 5 million tons a year from all kinds of industries. Obviously, it requires a great deal of expertise, material for material, to make that happen. And obviously, we cannot do that by ourselves. We have to collaborate. We have to collaborate to actually make that happen. Most of our clients actually want that. They want to be able to build new stuff, new products on recycled material. So how will we make that happen? Do we, as a waste management or a garbage company, do we have a role in that? Yes, I think we do. And I think most certainly we are actually trying to play that role already. Was that the long answer to your question?
I think it was an excellent answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
In this process, Jamie, we have had a lot of measurements on what money is in this circular economy. Talking about jobs, is there any estimation? Anders referred to a report coming up, but is there already some kind of estimation pointing to that this will actually be beneficial for jobs?
So I think the EU, can you hear me? Yeah, the EU estimates that in the short term it could generate between 1.4 and 2.8 million jobs in Europe. I don't know how they've calculated that. It's pretty complicated to do. But I believe that more work is being done on that now. But the other interesting thing obviously is that there may be winners and losers in terms of the employment system. So you may decrease some employment in the east where you're doing extraction and increase into markets where you're using and servicing. But we think that it's a very strong likelihood there would be a net gain in employment globally and more distributed employment patterns, which would be very good for say, Europe and the US.
Anders, when Martin was leaving, I asked him the question whether there would be a green tax change with a renewed government. And he mentioned chemicals and something else, but he didn't mention labor. Do you think there is a requirement also to work on the labor side?
Absolutely. I've been exposed recently to quite a lot of studies with regard to the digitization of the economy. If you read The Second Machine Age, or you read Jeremy Rifkin's latest book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, you really get the impression that in the next 10 to 20 years, many of the jobs, regular jobs in society will disappear. So we will need to be very clever to stimulate job creation, and the conventional concept that more growth in the economy will automatically provide more new jobs. I don't think that's going to work. So we have to design a different type of economy, and we have to boost services of different kinds. And the only thing to do that in the short term, I think with some effect, is to make it cheaper to hire people. So lower taxes, absolutely. But whether Ådahl can make that happen together with some of his present partners, that's another issue.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he cannot reply. But I was thinking, Felix, I'm sure that some of the people in the audience and even myself are thinking now and then, some of the business models we have out there is really focused on, consuming. That's really at the core of how these companies work. How do you think about that at H&M?
Well, we see that in the future, of course, we need to work on growing whilst decoupling our use of natural resources. Like I showed with our value chain, we worked a lot on our business model through the whole value chain, how we can work on efficiency in different parts of the value chain. But we are also exploring different ways of engaging with our customers, like the garment collecting initiative, for instance. And I'm quite sure that we will see more and more of these initiatives coming from H&M on how we can deliver different ways that customers can experience fashion in the future. So we are looking at different models. We worked a lot with our business model through the value chain, and I'm quite sure we will see new initiatives coming from H&M.
I was thinking, Erik, that this change, we talk about it, and there's a few people around here who understand what it's all about, but how do companies actually go about this? Is there a competence dimension here? I mean, are people ready within the companies? Can we make this happen? Is there a competence shortage?
I think there is, absolutely. I think that's one of the key challenges I have as sustainability responsible in our company, is to bring the rest of the guys along. And if we're serious about including a sustainability perspective in how we define competitiveness, that is not up to the environment department or the sustainability department to do that. That's the job of the commercial guys, the marketing guys, and the people working in the factories. And you can only achieve that by making sure that they're competent and understand what they're there to do. Not only to that function, but also to do it with less and less impact, and also including it in the way that we deliver competitive products to our customers, making them more competitive. So competence is key, absolutely.
Competences and, I would say, mindsets. Because we have mindsets that are, focusing very much on what we always have been doing, and focusing on labor productivity as number one in every company. That's where you shed costs. Now I think we have to shift the focus. Labor productivity has gone up by a factor of more than 20 over the last 150 years. Resource productivity between 1 and 2. So there is a huge potential here, but you have to shift the mindsets among economists.
Among economists. David, I was thinking, now we want to get circular, but if we push this really hard, we may be pushing out, poisonous, hazardous materials in these flows just by, trying to become circular. How should we be working, making sure that that doesn't happen, that this really brings also the clean flows? Well, what is the role of the recycling companies?
I mean, we can't do all this by destroying the world even more. We just have to be very secure that whatever materials we actually reuse or recycle or what we do with it is safe, is under controlled circumstances, recycled back again. And of course, I mean, we have an issue of being a company that predominantly deals with secondary material or mixed waste flows, in the sense that it's a big challenge actually to make them clean. It's a big challenge to redefine something that originally was waste to new raw materials. But that effort is ongoing all the time. And I'd like to add to the thinking around the employment opportunities. Now, if you think of this forward-directed flow here, I mean, many of us buy those products that come out of that every day. I mean, how many in the room bought a TV the last 2 years? A few TVs, right? I know there are more people that did that because the statistics show that. You probably paid around 5,000 crowns for a TV. That is the combination of material flows from all parts of the world, from different mines, from assembly factories in China and what have you, right? And it's produced in a beautiful package. You bring it to your shop and then you take it home and you're happily watching it, right? And then by the end of life of that, it ends up in the same bin as everything else. So that amazing professionalized distribution chain and logistics chain that led up to your purchase of this TV and to your consumption at your home, when you throw it away, everything stops to be professional. I mean, it's not that we are unprofessional, it's just that it's extremely manual to dismantle a TV or any other thing. I mean, no one today would think of the opportunity to build a new TV in Sweden because the labor cost is too high. That's all done somewhere else. But dismantling TVs, we gladly do manually in Sweden. So it's interesting, huh? And I think our role in this is, of course, to professionalize the return flows of materials. And there will be tons of competences needed, tons of people engaged in that, to make sure that we can actually match the 300-year industrial revolution that's been ongoing in this direction with a little bit quicker development of a professionalization of that flow. And that's what we are engaging in. Of course, trying to spread the knowledge of how to do it as well.
May I ask a question in that context?
Please.
To Jamie, you must have looked into that. I mean, we have a very globalized economy now, as David just indicated, with supply chains that are very, very wide, and the material loops are very, very large. In order for the circular economy to really be effective, I would imagine that for at least a majority of the products, we should try to make the loops not so large.
Yeah, so I guess this is a really interesting question. Like, if you look at the Ricoh example, these guys are building a printer photocopier in Japan, and then they ship it into the market into Europe. And the UK is a big enough market for Ricoh printer photocopiers that at the end of one life cycle of the printer photocopier, they have a plant in the north of the UK in Telford where they employ 220 people, and they have a reverse production line. So they systematically, on a robotic production line with people, take these printers apart, upgrade them with new components, load new software, put new fascia on, send them out the door with the same warranty as a new product back into the market. So they've got this hybrid model whereby they're pumping stuff out from Asia, but then they're creating employment opportunities. And then I think this diversify kind of manufacturing also from additive manufacturing. Like, I think people still think 3D printing is stuff for like hobbies, people in your garage, right? But you've got like Boeing, GM, people like this now starting to print major components of airplane chassis and automotive parts using this type of technology. So some of these emerging technologies will help this. And just one last comment that I think is when you start to talk about labor and you start to, it's literally looking at the economy as not a conveyor belt, but a metabolism, that you start to see this. So I think the danger is you think, or you start to think, oh, circular economy is about getting consumers to bring stuff back so we can recycle more, right? That's not, I don't think, where the opportunities exist here. The opportunities exist here to see this is about the future of the way we buy and sell services, the way people will work in the economy, the way technology will come together with service provision, future healthcare, the way buildings are made. This is about the economy moving from its linear state to one which is different, effectively. So.
Thank you. I was thinking, listening to Eric, that you're now going through a process where you actually look into your materials, trying to make them more biological, more recyclable. In the fashion industry, is it already happening? You know, do you have T-shirts with plastic signs on? Or are you also going through this type of material assessment to make the garment more easily recyclable? Is it happening, or is it still to happen?
Both, I would say. I mean, I think many are seeing that there is a challenge in designing for easy assembly at the moment, because many of the sort of mixtures are creating the kind of fashion that we have today. So I was listening to Jamie and sort of talking about structural changes in sort of how you use materials rather than mixing many different materials to create a change. I think there's a lot of innovation going on, but it's still quite a lot at the innovative sort of table, and it's not been turning to mainstream materials. So there are loads of initiatives in the way of testing. So I'm hoping again that in the future we will be seeing those kind of materials in our more kind of conscious collections to show customers that, you know, you don't have to trade off sort of the feeling, the style, because you're buying a different type of material which has a much smarter design.
Mm.
May I put a question to you about, because yesterday you said that cotton is of course a problem because it requires a lot of water, and there is quite heavy pesticide use on the fields, etc. So you are trying to recycle because of that, but can you substitute some of the cotton with materials from the forest industry?
There is work on that as well, yes, to create cotton-feeling materials from other cellulosic fibers. Because, I mean, we are seeing that cotton is something that has been experienced in the fashion industry for a long time, and it's an appreciated material. Mm-hmm. Now we need to find other substitutes that can deliver the same feeling, yes.
And I have a question for Eric also.
And you'll have to wait, because I want to actually allow the audience. If there is any question in the audience, I think we should let the audience have a question. There's a question over there. Do we have a microphone, or if you are...
I'm brave enough to shout. Thank you.
That will do.
My name is Robin Mock. I'm from Demos Effect. We are a Nordic think tank. I wanted to bring something to the picture that I feel a lot of you are dancing around, but not really talking about. That's the consumer, the person who makes the choices. Because ultimately, fundamentally, the size and the speed of the cycle is decided by only one thing, and that's consumer choice. So I wonder how you're going to deal with increasing size of homes, more driven miles, more flown miles, increasing consumption of beef. I'm suggesting that you would need to bring some kind of consumer perspective to the model. There is access ownership, I can see there. But I would be interested in, you know, what's the next step? Clearly, this is working with the production side. I would like to see how you bring this thinking to the consumer side.
Thank you. I think Jamie would... I'd like to introduce Jamie first and then allow the companies to respond. But there has been some work on the consumer side in Ellen MacArthur.
Yeah, so I think understanding that perspective would be very industry and product specific. So in the mobile phone example I gave, in the past models, you would have relied on somebody to do the right thing to bring the old phone back into the store. Yeah, and by shifting that business model, obviously, you're negating that. I think even down to the fast-moving consumer goods level, there are fantastic opportunities to basically close the loop on the economics such that the consumer becomes part of that process. There's a project going on at the moment between, it's like a research project between Unilever and Walmart and others to look at how you could intelligently tag plastic packaging in the economy. If you are able to do that, you would then end up with the recycling organization knowing whose product it was. They would then phone up the manufacturer and say, we get 500,000 tons of your feedstock, but we can only recycle 10% of that. If you change the design of X, Y, and Z in terms of the materials of the packaging, we could increase that feedstock value, and effectively you create the right mechanism. At the moment, you're reliant on the consumer doing the right thing or a municipal plan. Now, there are other things, like you mentioned beef, for example. There are obviously substitutes to that in terms of what you could shift. And I don't think what we're suggesting is that all of this would happen as fast as it could do without factoring in those externalities that Anders mentioned. So yes, there are, I would say, issues with regards to the way the economy doesn't internalize some costs. But what we're also trying to point out is that there is a huge opportunity without any change in legislation or policy now to start doing a lot of this. So I think it's a kind of converging theme. You probably need both to happen, but there is a lot of latent opportunity there for the taking now.
Erik?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, the consumer perspective is the most important one. We did a consumer segmentation exercise 2 years ago, where we looked at grouping consumers into the way they act and live their lives. We could see that we divided it into 6 segments. 3 of those segments, people prioritize environment and sustainability priorities very high up in the agenda. In one segment, it was the number 1. In the 2 other segments, it was the number 2 rationale for choosing a certain product. And I think it would be plain stupid not to realize that there's a huge market opportunity in delivering on those expectations and needs. So the consumer is absolutely at the center of this. And I think we see that happening very much so in Sweden and in other parts of Europe as well.
Can I make one tiny comment?
Tiny, and then Anders.
We did a study with a big DIY company called B&Q, and we polled the customers to find out whether they care about sustainability, whatever. 80% of them said, yes, we really care. When it came to buying decisions, how many people made a different decision? I think 2%. So you can ask, and the behavior is not always the same. But anyway.
Anders?
I think a tax shift where you provide services that are not as expensive as they are today will change a lot. So I think a tax shift is part of the recipe. Then what I'm seeing among young people is this concept of a sharing economy is growing. There are many examples of this. And you don't own your car. You are part of a carpool. You rent your clothes, etc. So there is something going on here in terms of values and attitudes, and some of them also leading to a different behavior. And I think companies seem to be very, very open to this, because they also see that if they are not proactive, they may lose market shares. I just have a tiny question to Erik, because I was happy to lecture in some of your seminars a few years ago in Lund for senior managers, and I remember because we were discussing the recycling percentage of your packaging, and at that time, I think this was in 2010 or 2011, there were about 150 billion cartons passing through your supplies. And at that time you recycled 20%. And I thought that was rather poor. Could you tell me today, what is the percentage?
I can. Today, 2013, the rate was 26%. The target for 2020 is to go to 40%, so a doubling of the share. The amount of material that we will recycle will actually triple, because we have an increase in the market as well. So the change is happening. 40% is by no means an end game. It is a step in the right direction. In the end, we need to go even further than that. In Sweden, the ambition is about 50 definitely, and more than that for 2020.
I see we have a question from Wayne up at the end. So that will be our last question.
Yeah. I have actually two. If it's allowed to. Thank you. Veine Wickvist from the Swedish Waste Management Association. First question is about what you think will be the circular, how will it look like when you think about 3D printers, when the consumers becomes the producer? The second question is about logistics. I agree with David earlier, said it's not much industrialized. And now if you think about the electric grid, nobody will think about one individual grid for everybody. We have a common grid. So therefore my question is, do you think there is a room for a more harmonized logistics system in order to facilitate the further collection of these materials going around in the circular economy? Thank you.
So I'd suggest that Jamie on the 3D printing, and if anyone else has an opinion or experience, and then David on the logistical question.
So we have a Rhodes Scholar from the University of Oxford doing a PhD on this subject around the circular economy and 3D printing, which I can send some more details on. But the fascinating thing is obviously if you got it right, it would be amazing. Like that example of polymers, that if you could build pretty much everything from a really small palette of materials. With the small palette of materials, you could then create volume, purity, and market share. So this would become markets of materials. The issue is having too many different types in the market. However, what happens in reality, and this is what we will discover from the project, is that it's a bit like printer cartridges, that the interest in the 3D printing organization normally is to create their own proprietary materials, which cannot be replicated or copied. So there's this kind of divergence in the market. There's even a guy in the Sahara who is printing 3D, he's printing glass using sand and solar energy. It's pretty cool, right? So he has quite a lot of feedstock if he wants to make some stuff. So there's this, like, one end you've got the guys really open source, and then you've got the other end, the really proprietary stuff. And there's good reasons for both, but it's kind of very early days.
Felix?
I just think from a fashion perspective, it's a super interesting technology, since fashion is really something that is evolving all the time, and you want to be able to deliver the latest feel and look. So it has huge potential for the fashion industry, and it's something that a company like H&M would definitely look into, how you could provide the customer the option of choosing through close-to-market 3D printing in one way or another.
So Spotify for clothes, you basically.
You know, cool.
So David, about the logistical platform.
Well, I mean, ultimately for all of us standing here, this is about competitiveness. We want to win our clients' trust. And obviously, the reason why a lot of industries now are engaging in circularity and recycling of goods and so on, it's because there is a consumer demand, and it's a forecasted increased consumer demand. Now, in order for us to be relevant in that, we of course need to work intensively and specifically with these individual companies to actually cater for their needs of getting goods back. Obviously, there is then a tendency of building specialized return flows and specialized logistics, company for company, and ultimately everyone understands that is not going to be the ultimate goal. It's not going to be efficient enough. So I mean, in order for us to be specific enough, we need to work intensively individually with companies, but then we need to combine it into a combined logistic flow that is specific enough and that actually delivers enough value. So it's an ongoing process where we need to be able to actually provide our specific knowledge about the materials and the recycling of them to the relevant industries, but at the same time try to combine those flows. So this will be ongoing for a long time, just like it has in the forward logistics. You remember industrial revolution started in the farming industry, and it was basically farmers building their own tractors. Very few farmers do that anymore. They actually buy something from someone that sells tractors, right? And I mean, for us in this industry, we actually build our own machinery. We still build our own machinery because there is none on the market. We have to invent methods. That will not go on. There will be specialized companies doing specialized stuff that cater for these needs, and that can actually facilitate common logistics flows and so on. So it's a major development.
Thank you very much. We are getting to a close, and we would like to hand over ecological honey. produced by ecological bees at our headquarters in Sollentuna, which has been part of the company history actually since 1881. In addition to that, we would also like actually to make a donation to an organization called Plan, which are focusing on educating girls in developing countries, because both according to the World Bank and the United Nations Development Program, few measures are as effective for promoting a sustainable future. Thank you very much, and welcome to the lunch.